V'ger must evolve. V'ger must evolve.
What do you think I am?
Don't tell me. You're from outer space.
No, I'm from Iowa. I only work in outer space.
Its knowledge has reached the limits of this universe. Its knowledge has reached the limits of this universe.
If you eliminate the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth.
Is there nothing more? Is there nothing more?
What more is there than the universe, Spock?
Other dimensions, higher levels of being, the existence of which cannot be proven logically. The existence of which cannot be proven logically. Therefore, V'ger is incapable of believing in them.
What V'ger needs in order to evolve is a human quality. Our capacity to leap beyond logic. Our capacity to leap beyond logic.
If you eliminate the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth.
This is your nautical lantern on the dangerous seas of darkness. Let's push off from the placid shore of the status quo and explore what's beyond the horizon. I am your host, BT, and this is Truth and Shadow, your podcast of the supernatural.
There are stories we tell because they entertain us, and then there are stories that seem to tell us. They pass through our imaginations like comets, igniting something ancient in our minds, leaving behind the faint scent of fire and memory. Star Trek the original series is one of those stories. Bright and utopian on the surface, but humming beneath with a far older song. It is a vision of the future framed in the myths of the past, where the Starship Enterprise becomes a modern-day Argo, and Captain Kirk plays the role not just of an explorer, but of an initiate. Some say there are 9 of them. 9 intelligences, 9 gods, 9 voices, and they're speaking from across centuries, masked in different guises. From the oracles of the pharaohs to the glow of transistor tubes, their names are not fixed. They are gods, after all, but their influence has remained steady. They have whispered behind thrones and appeared in seances. They have claimed to shape the destiny of nations and guide the evolution of consciousness. If that seems absurd, recall how myth always cloaked its truths in metaphor. The burning bush, the thunderbolt, the beam of the transporter light. Gene Roddenberry, the man behind Star Trek, was invited to a seance in the 70s, one that called upon the 9. He sat in the presence of an entity who claimed to be one of them. The being spoke through a human mouth. It claimed to have been guiding humanity. For centuries it claimed many things. Soon thereafter, Roddenberry began to reshape the philosophical underpinnings of his beloved science fiction series. The show that began as a naval western among the stars became something else, a parable of human potential, seeded with moral codes and strange interventions. Gods and demigods began to appear, not as religious figures, but as alien intelligences. They arrived as computers, probes, energy beings, disembodied voices. They punished hubris and rewarded mercy. They bent time and altered fate. Why so many gods in a universe that claim to leave religion behind? In the episode Who Mourns for Adonis, the crew encounters Apollo. Yes, that Apollo. Living in isolation on a remote planet, he reveals himself not as a deity but as an alien, as part of a race that once upon a time visited Earth and was worshipped. We came to teach, he says, but you have outgrown us. The gods here are not divine. They're part of a lost pantheon of manipulators. We outgrow them only in form, not in presence. They are still there, watching. And then there's Assignment Earth, the Season 2 finale that was intended to launch a spin-off. In it, the Enterprise travels back in time, meets Gary 7, a human, raised by unseen extraterrestrials, for the purpose of guiding Earth's development. His masters are never shown. They operate from the shadows. They speak only through technology. They claim to be good, but we are never quite certain. Time and again, Star Trek returns to this motif. Intelligence is beyond comprehension, beings who claim ownership over human history. Sometimes they are cosmic judges, as in the Squire of Gothos. Sometimes they test us, like the Mitrons in Arena. Sometimes they annihilate entire civilizations, as easy as breathing. But almost always, they stand in groups, councils, tribunals, collectives. Always they are 9 in spirit, if not in number. The 9 gods of esoteric lore are not gods in the classical sense. They are architects, trans-dimensional engineers, perhaps, or remnants of a previous universe. They often speak through mediums or influence those with power. Their fingerprints seem to be found in the mythologies of Egypt and the Vedic Navagaras. In the 9 orders of angels in science fiction, they often wear the faces of reason, progress, or universal law. But behind the mask, the old pattern remains. The Aeneid is a myth of divine manipulation, though not the origin of the 9, it is a prototype of their involvement. The gods squabble over Aeneas, use him as an instrument, propel him across a shattered world toward a destined empire. In that tale we see the eternal dynamic, the mortal hero manipulated by immortal will. Kirk is another Aeneas. So is Spock, with his bloodline split between logic and emotion. So is every human who steps into the transporter and disassembles their body in faith that they will reemerge whole. In some ways, Star Trek is the mythology of a post-industrial priesthood. Its bridge crew are robed in primary colors. They serve a Prime Directive, a code of non-interference that is broken almost as often as it is upheld. They venture into the unknown, where they are judged, tempted, remade. Behind them always stands Starfleet, a federation that proclaims peace while quietly enforcing order across the galaxy. In the lore surrounding the 9, it is said that their goal is to prepare humanity for an evolutionary leap, that they communicate through symbols, through mass media, through dreams, that they seed ideas in the minds of artists, scientists, generals. And if that's true, then Star Trek may be more than a show. It may be a ritual, a guided revelation, a mask for the transmission of mythic technology. And they call them myths, gods, aliens, archetypes. But I've seen enough to know the line between fiction and control is paper thin. If the 9 are real, whatever they are, they've been shaping us longer than we've been writing stories. Star Trek wasn't just a television show, it was disclosure in disguise, a test, a signal, maybe even a blueprint. We laugh at ancient gods and worship progress, but the same hands still steer the ship. We think we're explorers. Maybe we're just the cargo. And something, is watching the stars when we finally figure it out.
To boldly go where ancient myths and modern stories intersect. Consider this: Star Trek. Is it more than science fiction? Does it reflect archetypes as old as civilization? The Aeneid, for example, the Egyptian pantheon of 9 gods, seems to resonate in surprising ways aboard the Enterprise. Captain Kirk reflecting Horus's bold leadership, Spock embodying the wisdom and logic of Thoth, maybe even Dr. McCoy as Anubis. These parallels aren't just coincidences, they reveal enduring patterns in human storytelling. What connects these narratives across time and culture? The answers lie in the symbols we return to again and again. And to sort this topic is the host of Ministry X podcast. He is the Alpha Quadrant detective, the Neutral Zone bandit. He has boldly gone. Daniel, welcome to Truth and Shadow podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me, BT.
Of course. So, for our audience, can you talk a little bit about what you do in your podcast and Ministry X, for example?
Sure. Well, Ministry X sort of started out with this idea that I could contribute to some of the fringe Christian conversation that had been going on in the podcast realm, going back to maybe about 2009 or so, when I sort of entered this circle of fringianity. And actually listened to Fringe Radio Network and a lot of podcasts on the network for a long time, and made friends with the podcast hosts, and eventually decided to do my own podcast. So with the idea being trying to sift through sort of these end time deceptions and really reveal the nature of the programming and the messaging that we see in the media and entertainment, and like we're doing today, how it parallels with, ancient narratives of the gods and goddesses sort of battling over the future of mankind and the destiny of humanity, and all these deep esoteric topics, and trying to connect it back to the Bible, connect it back to a biblical worldview, and taking my own experience with the occult and mysticism and that sort of thing, and injecting my personal experiences. Because ultimately, I'm not comfortable talking about things I don't have any personal experience with, things that are secondhand information. Also, a lot of sort of dissecting narratives, and I think now we've gotten to the point where, especially if you cover conspiracies and this sort of thing, I think the individuals that have, you could say, a secret agenda, they sort of use our conspiratorial, inquisitive minds against us now, to where if they can get us to believe that the government is hiding some huge alien plot or treaty that we signed with them, and get people to believe that there's this big cover up, we might actually miss what's really being covered up. So it's kind of going down these rabbit holes and pulling up scriptures. And I jump from alien topics to right now I'm doing Mark of the Beast, kind of doing a deep dive on that. So it's kind of all over the place in this sort of fringe Christian tradition, I guess. So yeah, I've been doing that for about 3 years now.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Yeah, and your podcast can be found basically everywhere. I mean, it's on iTunes. That's where I go for podcasting. So it's going to be on iTunes and everywhere else.
It's pretty much out there everywhere. Yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah, we had been talking, you and I, about some of our similar interests, one of them being, Star Trek and some of those things that are kind of quirky about the whole story, and some of the weird connections that Gene Roddenberry had. And I thought we could let's just spend some time. We're going to talk about that. Let's talk about Gene Roddenberry and his particular curiosities.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and this episode has been kind of also a long time in the making. I go back about a year ago, and Johnny McMahon, the owner of the Fringe Radio Network, was trying to sell me on this Strange New Worlds series, saying, it's the best Star Trek since the original series, and you got to watch it. He even went so far as to buy me a Paramount Plus a gift card so I could sign up for Paramount Plus and I could watch these. And so I made some observations about that, and I'd heard that Gene Roddenberry had hung out with psychics and channelers and this sort of thing, mentioned from time to time. And then I learned about Andrea Puharich, the psychiatrist in the 70s, who was probably best known for bringing Uri Geller into public prominence and just all these sort of intelligence connections and how this tied back into the UFO alien abduction stories. And I really started this podcast examining what's come to be known as the UMO hoax, which was a UFO incident that happened in the 1950s in Spain and France, and it's not really well known in American UFO lore, and so I started looking at UFO hoaxes as well. So I've never been. There's a lot of UFO podcasts of true believers who believe aliens are visiting us. They've been watching us from other planets. I am more skeptical of that view. I think it's a much more nuanced phenomenon, a multi-layered thing that's going on. And there have been a lot of historical out-and-out hoaxes. And it's also come out that our own military and our own intelligence agencies have been involved in disinformation campaigns as well. So naturally, we're gonna get around to Star Trek, and we're gonna get around to William Shatner also, and some of his views about the environment and climate change and that sort of thing. It's all tied into it, and slowly over the years, I started realizing, well, this sounds a lot like sort of the UN's goals for 2030. We need to get rid of, public ownership of weapons. We need to disarm all of the nukes. We need to all come together under a, unified global government. And it seemed really odd that the aliens would have the same sort of message that's being pushed by these globalist organizations.
Right.
It's right.
What's the Green Party, the alien Green Party, right?
And then you look back at the UMO hoax, and it was the same sort of thing. You could see sort of human political commentary of the day, whether it was against fascism or whatever, interwoven in this sort of UFO mythology that they'd had woven around it, because extraterrestrials give you more credibility. Well, if the aliens, this advanced race, has this idea of a more, utopian future for the human species, well, we should listen to them, So, and then I think there's actually legitimate phenomenon going on as well. So it's a really difficult topic to sort out and unpack. So I try and pick out one little thing per episode. And so now we're, finally getting around to covering this topic after, about a year of starts and stops. And so, yeah, Gene Roddenberry.
Well, if we even talk about Uri Geller for a second, I mean, this guy was obsessed. One of the major things that was weird about him is he tied his psychic abilities to the UFO phenomena. And I think that's something that probably shouldn't go without note, because if this guy is so wrapped up in, a UFO, if I could say a UFO cultic belief, that he is that all of his powers are coming from some kind of psychic wave phenomenon. And it's the 70s. I mean, it's just like, the guy I think he was famous on television. He was pretty much basically like a flower child kind of dude anyway. And so, I mean, it's like, he lived the yuppie hippie lifestyle. And I think that goes to show where his mind would be on a, basically on a extreme liberal end, if you could say that, progressive liberal end. But anyways, Gene Roddenberry himself was into some of these psychic phenomenons too.
Yeah, so he would sit in on these seances and these sessions that were held by this channeler at the time, Phyllis Schwimler. And I think I have that name right. And she was also sort of this celebrity psychic of the 70s. And like you think of the 90s, you think of like Sylvia Browne was kind of like this celebrity psychic, Dionne Warwick or whatever. So she was like the celebrity psychic of the 70s, and Gene Roddenberry and also people like Steven Spielberg were fascinated by, these accounts where she would contact this Council of Nine, who said they were from deep space. They're responsible for the origins of humanity and imparting, wisdom from the stars. And she would contact these entities. And Gene Roddenberry would sit in on these sessions. And we don't have a whole lot of details as far as particular questions that were asked, particular information that was exchanged. But based on her writings, we can kind of tell the content of most of these seances were centered around these, non-human intelligences that she was channeling. And definitely, I think Gene Roddenberry's spoken about how that was served as some inspiration for Star Trek, and specifically the bridge crew, relating to the Nine, which is parallel to the pantheon of Egyptian deities in the dynastic period of Egypt, like you said, and Deep Space Nine, the another Star Trek spinoff series. These entities claim to be from deep space. There's 9 of them. And some of the concepts that you see show up in the Star Trek films also tie into that. And even the idea of the Borg ship, the cube-shaped, ship. Supposedly all these things came from these channeled sessions that he sat in on.
Yeah, some of those sessions, if we talk about those same seances, they had some of the big family names. I mean, like, someone of the DuPont family was there. I mean, it's just the level of connection to, dare I say, ruling wealthy elite families being together and doing seances in itself may not be kind of weird, because I mean that's pretty normal that they do weird things anyways. But the thing is I think they believe in this stuff, and that's probably where the scary part is. It's like they have as much faith in whatever message they're receiving from the Ennead that you or I may believe in the scriptures in the Bible. I mean, it's just it's that same level of faith, and I think that's the kind of thing we're dealing with. And so Roddenberry was able to draw these ideas potentially from the results from these seances.
Yeah. I agree with that. The way I see it, the 70s was sort of this sort of renewed interest in spiritism, which kind of preceded the big kind of new age self-help like explosion that we saw in the 80s. But the origin of this was really, the Cold War and the space race and the nuclear arms race and all the fear and hysteria. And So people were looking for alternative explanations. And so I think it's really like fascinating what came out of these sessions. Is she really, I mean, I don't think necessarily she's legitimately contacting non-human intelligences, or maybe she is. I can't say. But they certainly believe that they were. And I think that's what we need to focus on. Even if we don't, we believe it's, just a bunch of kooks and woo-woo stuff, that if they believe it. And these are people that are high society people. These are people with a lot of influence and a lot of connections in the military, in intelligence, in the university system. So it's important, even if we don't agree or believe, and, as Christians, we don't give heed to non-human intelligences, from other planets, as our authority for how to conduct our lives or how to, transform the earth into a utopia or whatever, but they do. And that's their worldview, their paradigm, and it shapes the politics and the policies that they get behind. I think people are always like, well, you're a Christian, but all I hear you talk about is UFOs and aliens and Bigfoot and stuff. And like, well, I'm not trying to convince you that, the whole alien thing is a hoax. I'm just trying to give you accurate information to consider as a Christian. I don't need to convince you that, Jesus is the savior. I'm going to try and give you information on some of these topics, and that's up. The rest is up to you. But it's important to see the different worldviews, the different viewpoints.
Yeah, one of the things that I think may be important to understand is an individual who can create an entire science fiction story, an entire thing that has gone from an original series to a next generation and beyond, Deep Space Nine, to what we have now, Stranger Worlds.
Strange New Worlds.
New Worlds. And we look at this and we all go back and the foundations are on Gene Roddenberry and Gene Roddenberry's vision of what the future would hold. And I wonder how much of his ideas, maybe his ideas that are influenced by the people he hung out with and this drive for a utopic future, may have played into creating this story.
Sure. Well, absolutely, because that's what we see in the Star Trek universe. It's all these the biggest problem that they have to worry about is sorry, I was thinking of something else, but I think it's funny that you see sort of the racial equality, but yet in the original series, he still Captain Kirk still has the female bridge officers bringing him drinks and stuff, and so it's interesting to see like the things that we've already like moved beyond technologically, what was portrayed in the early episodes of Star Trek, versus the things that still appear to be in the future. The warp drive and transporters and that sort of thing. But money doesn't exist anymore. They don't use money anymore. But somehow everybody has everything that they need. And, whatever problem they encounter, it's usually, resolved in 60 minutes. And, we get done and we feel good about the future. If we could just, all come together. And, what I think is interesting that in the Star Trek universe, this, like you said earlier, the utopia is preceded by a period of turmoil. And in Star Trek, it's like the eugenics wars. They have these, World War III, they narrowly escape, destroying themselves and destroying the planet. And this is the same sort of thing that you get from, Tragedy and Hope, and that there, in order to transition to this future utopia world, it's going to have to come out of some chaos, some calamity, some global catastrophe, because otherwise human beings won't unite. We'll just squabble among ourselves forever unless there's a global threat,
an external global threat, something that's from outside.
Yeah.
And we don't mean like the idea is like not a virus or a bacteria, but literally a foreign life form.
Mm-hmm.
That seems to be the driving component that seems to push a lot of these ideas. But see, science fiction had been a way of exploring the idea of a new world in a lot of different ways, but Star Trek did it differently, right? The end of the world comes and then everybody's united, but then they're supposed to be like so much better off, and there's no more of this, there's no more poverty, war, etc. And they try to show this when they do the movies where they travel back in time and they show, modern day 1980s. Well, for them, because you go back in time of the voyage home, and that's the era that you're living in. So it's like, this is how backwards everybody is compared to how refined we are in the future, and it's kind of an interesting jab at modern society.
Yeah, and then all our adversaries now, these are from other regions of space, but it's like the Vulcans are kind of like the Romans, and the Klingons are kind of like maybe the Mongols or something, and then this sort of like human opera, this human drama can play out on the interstellar scale now, but we still face the same sort of troubles. It's just like you said, it's externalized now. It's dealing with other species from other planets.
There's a lot of the. I do understand the point of making a story and making things that are a way to explore things that we may be dealing with in the modern world, right? Like you said, it's the 70s, 80s. It's the Cold War era. So TOS is really dealing with some of the things that are going on. There's the Romulan threat, but we don't really know much about it. They do sneak attacks, and I mean, it's just like that's Russian submarine stuff, and it's just yes, it is designed to make us look at what we're dealing with and facing every single day. But there's an aim behind it, and that aim, while trying to sell a good story, has its roots in something maybe a little bit more nefarious, I guess I could say.
Mm-hmm.
So if we look at, this is the other thing that's really interesting with Star Trek 2 is they've done screen first. I don't know if you know this, but Star Trek was the first TV series to have a white man kissing a black woman.
Yeah, first interracial kiss
on television. And then Star Trek Deep Space Nine was the first on-screen woman kissing a woman. So this is an actual this is a thing that they've had histories of exploring things that are going on maybe in the modern world, things that are people see or interact with every day, interracial couples, to same-sex attraction. I mean, these are all things that our modern society faces every day, and it's being explored. Maybe explored isn't the right way of saying it, but just being flag planted on the TV screen and showing that they acknowledge in the story what is happening in the real world.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a real weird way of telling a story too.
Yeah.
Well, what about like Gene Roddenberry's beliefs, right? His religion or philosophy? What do you think would really influence, or how would he use that kind of influence on the screen? So if we're talking about the bridge crew, I mean, what would we be looking for?
As far as like his, I don't really know a whole lot about his personal religious beliefs.
Well, let's extrapolate.
I think he was pretty atheistic,
right?
Which it's not hard to figure that out from watching the series.
No.
Nothing is spiritual. It's purely like scientific, materialist sort of worldview. In fact, a lot of the series, a lot of the episodes spend a lot of time sort of making a mockery or belittling the races of people out there on other planets that still have primitive worship and in fact view the Enterprise crew as, the gods, in their, magical ship. And it's very much pushing the idea that we've humanity long moved past the sort of primitive ideas and embraced this sort of technocratic, postmodern worldview, and dismissed the things of mythology. And it's parodied. It's a humorous. It's a source of humor in the series, and it's sort of it mirrors sort of liberal society where we sort of pay lip service to the disenfranchised and minority groups and marginalized groups, but at the same time we are pushing everyone into this modern future that's a multicultural society, and the old traditions, the old religions have to suffer, have to morph into something else. All gods have to matter. If we're going to have this idea of God, then it has to be all inclusive of all cultures, and it's all the same thing after all. It's just people's beliefs about things, but ultimately it's a scientific endeavor that's going to prove to be the ultimate reality or the ultimate truth. So, and I think that's pretty self-evident, watching the show. The funny thing is that I don't agree with that at all, but I mean, I love the series, it's nice and it feels good. It feels good to think, well, in the future, we're going to finally figure out all our problems and we're going to venture out into the stars as, representatives of not just, America or Russia or China, but the human race. And I think there's something in that sort of appeals to everybody. But if you break down the fine details of what that means, it definitely doesn't include God. It definitely doesn't include, his, sovereign kingdom on earth and any of this. So without, reading any quotes from Gene Roddenberry about his religious beliefs or lack thereof, you can kind of derive that from just watching what he puts into his show.
Yeah, I was thinking about, when you were talking about that, what I was thinking is the Prime Directive, right? The Prime Directive seems to be this order force that is designed to basically say, hey, this is how you interact with cultures that are inferior to you. And I'm like looking at the potentials here. I was looking at the Prime Directive. Could it be some kind of modern reinterpretation of the divine order that the Ennead seems to follow? I think they called it Ma'at, and it's just it's this order where the elites choose whatever, the gods choose what humans do, and it's kind of, that's seems to be that.
Yeah, I can see that. The Prime Directive, it's non-interference, right? Because we're more advanced, we don't really have the right to interfere with the natural evolutionary development of this other species. So it's sort of like this. It's almost like this white guilt or whatever that's projected onto other species now. Like, because of the Crusades and all the bad stuff that, we did to these primitive cultures. And, in the future, we're going to correct that by saying, no, we're not going to interfere with your culture. It's fine what you believe. And, maybe we might feel bad if we notice, there's an asteroid heading for your planet. And, maybe we'll try and help you out then, but otherwise, we're going to stay out of it until you develop nukes, until you develop warp drive, and then we'll reach out and welcome you to the Federation.
Yeah, just if I were to ask, could Star Trek basically be this vessel? Not to make a pun there, but Star Trek could sure seem to serve as a continuation of the ancient mythological traditions in this futuristic context. Mm-hmm. And, you got to look at the ideas, the technology invested or technological investments in the show that go from, pushing buttons like the old school computers to walk around with flat devices in your hand. The inventions that are mentioned on Star Trek take about 30 years before they're realized and actualized and utilized. It's just using desk computers to talk to somebody across the world, basically. That's what we're doing. Right. And that was something that was done, sure, as a storytelling device, but now we're doing it. And it's like, if you look at it in that context, then it's like it kind of removes the conspiracy a little bit. But like I said, it's just enough story to tell us this reenactment of an Ennead to make us buy into the ideas that there could be this future of peace, but at what cost? And that cost is played out in the TV shows, especially when I can't remember the particular episode, but the original series crew comes across Apollo, the god, and they interact, and it's this really weird interaction because it's like, here's like an entity that's a spirit force that's part of the Greco-Roman pantheon. But the bridge crew is the Egyptian, therefore older pantheon, and then that's right. The way the power struggle plays out. Mm-hmm. Where the bridge crew's like, we're actually the real people. You're just a make believe thing because people have to believe in you to have for you to exist. It's just a really weird story.
Yeah. It takes like the old mythologies and sort of turns them on their head, and it's updating basically the same function that storytelling and mythology had for ancient people. back then you gather around the fire and tell stories about your ancestors. But nowadays we don't do that. We gather around our TV or our phones and we stream stuff on Netflix. So that's our mythology. That's our stories.
Yeah, and then I mean, you've probably looked at the idea of predictive programming. I mean, this is throughout Star Trek.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what kind of ideas could we? I mean, besides the technology stuff that we spoke about, I mean, what other things do you think we can look at that would be part of that idea of predictive programming?
I think it's forecasting a future, really with the understanding of quantum physics and quantum mechanics. That I guess that's part of the technology discussion, but the transporters, being able to disassemble molecules and reassemble them, and I think you see our ideas of artificial intelligence certainly being explored. They come across a culture that's long died out, but they left this record, this probe that's actually this interactive thing that has this link, somehow links to you. And the technology of how they do it is not quite explained or understood, but this is how they've maintained the records, the Akashic records of their civilization or something. So you see all kinds of those ideas, predictive programming. I think a lot of it's not necessarily a conspiracy or this overarching plot in every sense. I think it's just a sort of subconscious way of understanding our path through the future, and how we might get there. It's the imagination. That's what really the details of that is what I sort of find fascinating. How these things are sort of conveyed on a subconscious level. Things as broad as like the sort of the structure of a future society, or just education, or what work will be like.
Yeah, there's like this idea, and it's kind of, if I were to think about it, it's like, well, if we look at when this series is kind of kicking off to, I mean, it wasn't too many years before that we put a man on the moon, and I mean, we've been launching rockets into space, but it's kind of like it was a system, a program that really was a big pit, big toilet of money. They were just dumping bucket loads of cash in there, and they weren't getting very far. And people, sure. I mean, you have, big names, Victor von Braun and all the rocketry, and, Jack Parsons. I mean, all the normal names that JPL and stuff that would kind of get thrown around for NASA and things. But you look at Gene Roddenberry and the TV series, putting that kind of TV series together, sure, made in some Hollywood basement, but I really think it was drawing money for the space program and for extraterrestrial communications. I mean, I think that was a real thing. Like, they wanted to not just use seance ritual anymore to get a hold of the Nine. They wanted to be able to make some kind of transmitter to find where they are, inner SETI.
Yeah. Yeah. And,
I mean, maybe even prepare us for first contact. I mean, kind of that idea to make it where, to make people a little bit more open to the idea of alien life being a constant. Because, I mean, they're like everywhere, Vulcans on the bridge crew, and aliens everywhere. You get used to seeing Gorn. I mean, gosh, the reptilians are horrifying looking, but I mean, how many alien abductees talk about seeing a reptilian anyways, and now here they are as a species explored quite in depth on Star Trek.
Yeah. I think it's fascinating, just the idea of why create a satellite? Why create a rocket to go to the moon and then Mars? What is the driving force behind, space exploration? And I think Star Trek and sci-fi in general got people really excited about the future, and like it's inspiring to think that, like, perhaps one day it seems possible that we can move past these terrestrial problems that we have and move into, space exploration. And Kennedy talked about, going into space, in a peaceful way, for the good of all humanity. And I think that's inspirational to people. And, you had a lot of, the pulp sci-fi stuff where aliens are just out to kill us, and the pod people and that sort of thing. But also there's the aspect that, our future is in the stars, or there's some greater destiny in the stars for us as well.
Well, yeah. And then on top of it, we've got, I do believe the newer shows really explored the Section 31 idea. I mean, this is kind of something that's been bouncing around anyways. It's got a long history. You can research and look at. Section 31 is basically the black ops, the covert black ops of Star Trek. I mean, yeah, this is kind of where we get the futuristic Prime Directive. It's like the time-traveling Prime Directive is Section 31. But there's more going on here with these people, and it seems like if an idea is presented on Star Trek, it seems to be designed to acclimate the audience, so the majority, to the idea of this thing being not so dark, not so evil. Enterprise with Scott Bakula really explored Section 31. And the idea is that, you got some kind of time traveler, and it's like all of these ideas. And I think it's basically the existence of a shadowy group mentioned in Star Trek, in the Star Trek universe, I guess, seems to really be hinting at, real agencies operating in real life. It's kind of, just like saying, hey, it's real. And, they tell us what it's like they have to tell us that they're doing it before, somehow eliminate their karmic backlash or something.
Yeah. Revelation of the method. Yeah.
Right.
So the Section 31, this is it. This is something in the Star Trek universe, you said? Because I've never really watched Enterprise with Scott Bakula. I never watched that series. So that's referring to sort of the black projects in the Star Trek universe.
Right. So if anybody, like if you watch it from show's beginning, the first mention of Section 31 outright is in Deep Space Nine, where they get Chief O'Brien. Chief O'Brien is basically a special Section 31 operative, and they go on missions and do covert operations. But it's like this underlying undercurrent in a character, maybe a character development. I mean, Miles O'Brien really didn't need more character development. The dude basically held the Deep Space Nine together. But anyways, it's just this amazing way of saying, hey, we're doing these things. It exists in Star Trek. It probably exists in real life, and it's throughout. And I think it's a pretty darn obvious thing.
So maybe what's coming then, with all this, disclosure supposedly that's going on now, eventually we're going to get to the point where they're going to say, well, yeah, actually, we did have these covert programs, and we did have these secret access programs, and we did have this arrangement with the aliens, but we didn't tell you for your own good because,
Prime Directive,
the Brookings report, and this sort of thing, and this is not going to be good for human society, but we feel like you're ready now. So I think we've been on this slow trickle of sort of UFO alien revelation for like decades now.
Right.
Which to me, because it's such a slow rollout, and there's so much conjecture regarding it, that it ultimately, when we get down to it, it's going to be a pretty major transformative thing.
Yeah, there's an idea or a thought, maybe even a claim, if you will, that basically the Vulcans, with their logical mind, or their kind of particular advanced technology and mind space advancements, like they're telepaths or whatever, they do all these different things, and they have mind melds and Vulcan neck pinches, and they can do all of these things that are just like way more advanced than it seems like a human can do. And it's like, the story says the early years for the Federation of Planets, it's basically the Vulcans are guiding, the humans on what to do. And so basically, if you take that idea, it's basically like the Vulcans are the ancient aliens, and they've been guiding mankind since the beginning. And it's kind of like getting people acclimated to the idea, so that when something does show up, quote unquote, they can just go, see, we've been telling you about it this whole time.
Yeah, it's going to seem, by that point, it's going to seem normal.
Right.
Which it already kind of is when we're having these disclosure hearings in Congress, and people just sort of are still kind of shrug their shoulders at it. Well, I guess there's aliens. I guess, these reputable people in the intelligence agencies, they wouldn't have anything to hide, or, no reason why they'd be lying,
No. The same people who met in the dark in some room channeling the nine forces. I mean, they would never lie to mankind at all.
But what's amazing is people aren't freaking out about it. Like, people aren't. Right. I guess there's an argument to be made. Like, some people are sort of ditching their faith and their religion for some, UFO religion, or something that includes the alien brothers in their theology or whatever. I think there'll be some of that going on, but people don't seem to be too panicked overall. So, if they roll out like Project Bluebeam tomorrow, I just wouldn't be surprised. Right. People were saying, when the drones flap was happening over New Jersey, this is Project Bluebeam. They're doing it.
Yep.
I was like, well, yeah.
Okay.
What are you going to do about it?
Yeah. All of these things are pretty much consistent, and they're brought up frequently throughout the story. And, we mentioned the Borg and the Borg cube earlier on in the episode, and it's kind of like this representation of a warning against what would be transhumanism, right? So basically, humans, as we continue to grow in our reliance upon technology, there's like this warning that you'll lose your individuality and you'll just become part of the collective, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you stop and you think about that, and you think about the way predictive programming works and the kind of algorithms that are used on certain short form video media, and the way that an individual can basically be exposed to the same kind of agenda throughout the day. The same, it's based on the same principles that work at a casino. It's designed to get you kind of addicted to looking at the screen, because you get this reward or this feel good, release of endorphins for doing this thing over and over and over all day long. And you're just sitting there and you're just staring at a screen, and you can watch somebody does something, somebody says something, and then you can watch all of the people that are just chomping at the bit to say something. And it's like, as we're more and more relied on technology, the more and more we think our voice, the world is listening to it, and it's just this massive cacophony of sound that nobody hears anymore. I've gone camping where there's a lot of mosquitoes, and eventually the sound just goes away, but they're still there, And so it's the same, the more and more people seem to be losing literally their individuality. They're part of this collective consciousness, and it's kind of aimed at, the warning that there may be some, neural implants, or, I guess one of the other things if I were to look at the Borg from the 90s perspective, if I was to look at it from a 90s perspective, not a 2025 perspective, because that's when it was introduced, a surveillance state, because they could see everything, hear everything, know everything. And so it's kind of like the idea that it's going to be this trajectory that, we can warn people about. I mean, it's whatever, there's countries in the world that implement a social credit score today and a social credit app, and nobody, it's like, you can use cash, but it's very rare, and they look at you funny, like a cashless society. So, I mean, it's like, those are ideas that are explored in Star Trek, but we're not really seeing them in the United States where it was born, but we are seeing that experiment played out elsewhere. And I think that's something we should be looking at.
Yeah, it's almost like the Borg contrasted against like the Federation,
right?
Is sort of this like Hegelian dialectic setup, sort of like, we want to go into space, we want to explore space, but we don't want to be the Borg. We don't want to be, this hive mind. Everyone can hear your thoughts, monitor your thoughts. If you go rogue, they just unplug you and you're done. And, but we'll fall back on, still having this sort of human relationships, and we still have, green plants in our quarters, and still maintain a little dose of our humanity, but they've actually accelerated us to where we accept, a little bit of the transhumanism, which without the full, the full, I guess, the dark side of the transhumanist future. But they will get us to accept some of the trappings of that projected future. Because I could never figure out, like, well, if this is the direction they want humanity to go, to collectivism, if this is just, it's Marxism disguised as sci-fi entertainment,
right?
If that's the direction they want us to go, then why are the plot lines, the Borg are the enemy? The Borg, we're the only species to stand up to the Borg and resist the Borg, even though resistance is futile. They're the enemy. They're not the friend. They're not our friends.
They're not an ally.
Yeah. They're not an ally. So, like, I'm like, why? Well, why do they make these plots where, the robots are the enemies, the aliens are the enemies? They don't present themselves as our friends,
right?
Even though I think that that's ultimately what they're going to present us with. The aliens are here to help us. They're here to help us evolve.
Right.
But that's not really what they're programming. I think they're programming a fear response, so that we will respond with sort of an equal measure of evolution, but under sort of our own ethical structure.
Yeah, I mean, if I were to make a claim that the Borg are some kind of anti-artificial intelligence situation, I mean, I would have to make a really big stretch on that one, mainly because the origin story for that particular species wouldn't really match up. They were a biological entity looking for perfection, and they found perfection in machinery. So it doesn't match that it's AI that would be because come on, AI could do some really cool things, but then it can't get fingers right,
Yeah.
And so it's like I'm not really convinced that we're being warned against artificial intelligence at this point. It really seems like it's probably a certain kind of transhumanism could be an enemy of a globalist agenda.
Mm-hmm.
Because a globalist agenda says that there are many races of people, obviously, and they're all individual and they're all distinct. Whereas the transhumanism is they are all one without any individuality.
Yeah. So we still want to. We'll accept the med beds and the beneficial things that this future can provide, but we're not going to go as far as this all or one idea. We still want to have our individuality, but we really like the holodeck. That's really cool, and those things are okay. We're cool with that, but I don't want everybody else's thoughts being shared with mine and that sort of thing. And I think we're heading towards this sort of discussion more and more in our society. And you see it right now with the incoming administration and the influence of Elon Musk. People are like, well, we like what Elon Musk says, but he also says that, we're heading towards this transhumanist future. And it's which version of the transhumanist future do you want to go with? Do you want to go with total globalist, top-down, technocratic control, micromanage every aspect of your life, eugenics, or the more libertarian version of that? So I think we're seeing that more. That's the discussion of the future that we're going to see.
If we were to look at the ideas for like eugenics, CRISPR is the one you look at today, right? So sure, the 1930s and Margaret Sanger and a handful of other individuals who wanted a eugenics that was basically, or a future, they wanted a future that was white, to say it very easily.
Right.
That's a different kind of eugenics than what we're really looking at. The idea that you can sequence genes to be what you want it to be. You want your child to be born with a different color eye than you? We can do that. You want your kid to not have curly hair? We can do that. We can do, through the abilities of CRISPR, program, and I mean that by program, an individual's genome, genetic code, to be what we want it to be. And while that may not be something that's so, if you want your child to have green hair, you can actually code that in using CRISPR. So that's kind of the future end of that. But at the same time, with eugenics, the doctor can test the child in the womb and say, this child has a 56% chance of having Asperger's. Would you like to terminate? And that's eugenics. That is removing an unwanted thing from the mainstream or the main flow of your society. Removing, in my honest opinion, autism is a creative force. And if you remove all the creatives from the world, all the artists, what are you left with? 7 of 9? I don't know.
Right. Well, they're already doing, like in places like Iceland, I think, because they've had so many abortions, if they detect that your child is Down syndrome, well, they abort the baby. So
without informing.
Yeah. They've eliminated pretty much Down syndrome in Iceland.
Right.
So on the surface, people are like, well, that's great. But you are talking about eugenics and you're weeding out the undesirables, whatever the undesirable trait might be.
Who gets to define the undesirables at the end of the day?
And that's the whole transhumanist argument, is humanity controlling our own evolution, and wrestling that away from God.
Yes, that's ultimately at the end of the day. If we were to all go back and just say, "Hey, look, the ones that get to play God are probably not the ones that you want on your team," right? If you look through the historical data and the information of anybody who has decided to play God for, well, the wages, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few idea, which was explored in Star Trek 3. No. Anyways, it was explored, and Spock sacrifices himself for the crew, and so this idea that one person's sacrifice to save many people should be like a hands down obvious choice, right? I mean, this isn't something that should just be looked at because you look at the whole story and it's like, well, actually the starship could have ejected its core and would have been fine. And I mean, that's all part of the story. This thing can be done where they just launch the thing into space and get away from it, and it blows up and everyone's fine. So the idea that you have to sacrifice one person, a human life, for technology seems to be, a no-go from the bat. I mean, that's somebody saying that I'm going to choose to play this moment as God would choose it. And it's like, no, I'm pretty sure God would not pick that, because you have an alternative option that is merciful and is just.
Yeah, well, I think if you look throughout history, every time we've tried to mess with human genetics through selective breeding or whatever, it's always ended up being a bigger problem.
Yes, the China one-child policy actually is probably a really good example.
That's what I was thinking of, yeah.
In the next couple hundred years, there will not be very many Chinese people on the planet because of this choice.
Yeah, they're in like deep doo-doo now.
Yeah, even since they've rescinded it, it doesn't matter. There is no way that they can possibly recover from the actions they chose.
Yeah, I have a friend of mine, a coworker, who's like, the planet's overpopulated. We can't, the planet can't sustain 8 billion people. It can't sustain 10 billion people. I'm like, well, it is if you just leave it alone, because, human birth rates are declining already. You don't have to, engineer society in such a way that, we don't have children anymore. It's going to happen as the eco load or whatever on the planet reaches a certain point. There's going to be certain mechanisms that kick in that will, naturally reduce our numbers. We don't need to interfere with that. Like you said, like you see in China now and Japan, it only takes a generation or two, and then you can't reverse it anymore. You can't reverse the process anymore.
Yeah, I mean, just to take numbers, we can take the entire population of the planet Earth, and you can put them into the United State of Texas.
Yeah.
Everybody would have a space of 31 feet by 31 feet. I mean, sure, that's not very big, but each individual would have an area of 936 square feet. Right? Which is basically the size of a small studio apartment. So everybody on the planet would live in about, would have the amount of space of a studio apartment in the state of Texas. Now you look at the entire planet and you tell me it's overpopulated. If I could put everybody in one state in an area of that size, we kind of are probably missing the mark.
Yeah, I mean, there's places here in Idaho where I know, like, no human has ever been before, know, ever. Like, I think
I've driven past that on my way to Utah. I mean, there's just miles of nobody forever, and it's Northern California is that way. There's miles of nothing.
Yeah.
I mean, sure, they could say it's grazing range or whatever for cattle, but it's miles and acres of nothingness.
Yeah. That's another big globalist push. Maybe the biggest is the whole overpopulation narrative. And I can remember back in high school, I did a paper on overpopulation. And
Right.
I was back in high school. I was pretty naive, and like we all are, I didn't know a whole lot. And yeah, I thought overpopulation, well, man, if we could solve overpopulation, we could solve all these other problems. And, this is what they say at the, World Economic Forum and stuff. And these are the arguments now that you hear coming out of the mouth of like Klaus Schwab and Bill Gates. And if we could just solve the overpopulation problem, then we solve hunger, we solve war, we solve climate change, we solve all these other issues. But when I wrote a paper about overpopulation in high school, I got like A++, but they loved that.
Right. Of course.
And this is in the 90s.
Right.
And then you realize like this is a social engineering experiment, because like you said, if the top 1% who control most of the world's assets and have condensed this power into just a small handful of people, well, that's what they'd naturally want to do to the rest of the population. The ones that don't get killed off, we're going to herd them into little cities, and we're going to have these big, wide open spaces that we can exploit for minerals and oil and natural resources and stuff. And you don't ever have to go there. You don't ever have to see it. You don't ever have to, go beyond, your 15-minute, walking distance to your store and your job and your parents' house. It's going to be all right there, very convenient. Everything will be delivered to you. Well, you've just basically put people in a concentration camp and given them some little trinkets and stuff to keep them occupied, and just enough to keep them from getting unruly. Meanwhile, you control the fate of the rest of the planet.
Yeah, let's see. If I were to just go back to graduation, so I graduated high school 2000. The global population was right around 6 billion, maybe even 6.1 or something like that.
Yeah,
billion people, and we're at like 8.7.
I think we're just over 8. I could be wrong, but
8.2,
something like that.
Something like that.
Pretty close.
And there's actually been a global birth decline of like 82%, 85%. And we look at the growth numbers between 2000 and 2025. It seems like a really big number. I mean, that's like from 6 to 8. That's 2 billion people. But then if you look at from 2025 and then another 25 years, we're only looking at like an increase of like 9 billion, like 800,000 more people, or 800 million more people, 800 more million people would be between now and in 25 years, as opposed to an increase of literally 2 billion in 25 years that we've seen. And so there's a global decline, and that global decline has definitely been part of the eugenics idea, the idea that certain people should be alive and not, and the aim that it's all humans' fault for the way everything works out. And that is something that is definitely said in the Star Trek universe. The whole reason why they are where they are is because of the global war basically wiped out mankind, kinda. And now they think that they're going to do better. They're going to make it a utopia. And that was ultimately Gene Roddenberry's idea of what a future would contain, is a future without God. Because it was God who caused the wars.
I think it was the pilot episode of Strange New Worlds where it's Captain Pike is sort of the emissary to this other planet, and he sort of has this PowerPoint presentation he wants to show them, because this particular species hasn't developed a warp drive. They developed a warp bomb.
Right.
And that's how the series kicks off. And he goes to explain, how we did this back in Earth's history. And it all started when people started to get different ideas about freedom.
Yeah.
And I was like, we're not trying to like paint the, patriots or anything like that in a bad light, are we?
Right.
Different ideas about freedom, not like, the Constitution or the Bill of Rights or, our rights come from God or anything like that. Just, silly ideas about, freedom is what kicked off this whole global catastrophe. And, just more messaging, it's the people that were questioning their government that caused all these problems.
Right. Yeah. Some of the scariest words is, I'm from the government and I'm here to help.
Yeah. Was that Ronald Reagan?
That was Reagan.
Yeah.
Well, Daniel, it's been a great conversation.
Absolutely.
Let the listeners know where they can find you. Obviously, you can find both of our shows on the Fringe Radio Network.
Yeah.
But where can we find more of Daniel X?
You can find, like you said, my show on Fringe Radio Network. I also do another podcast called the Fringe Radio Network Roundup, which kind of does a week-by-week kind of review of some of the episodes and stuff that you'll hear on Fringe Radio Network. So I'm doing that. Me and Johnny kind of doing a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff at the network. So you'll find both those shows on the network. You can also find Ministry X wherever, like on any of your podcast players or whatever. And you can find me. I'm on X. FRN_Daniel_X. Since there's so many Daniel X's on Twitter, on X, that's where you find me there. Or just search Daniel X. I'm also on Gab. Where else am I? I'm not very prolific with the social media stuff, but
right.
That's the best place to try, Gab or X, I would say.
You have a Substack?
I don't have a Substack.
Okay. That's
no.
All right. That takes a lot of work too.
It does.
Fantastic. I'll make sure all of those are in the show notes. Cool.
Okay.
Man.
Awesome.
Appreciate your time. This was a great conversation, and we'll probably pick it up again.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. There's a lot more to cover with this, I believe.
Thank you for listening. This is a free podcast based upon the value for value model. If you find value in this, or any episode, you can return that value by liking the show, subscribing to this channel, leaving a review, or sharing with a friend on your social media accounts. You can also donate on my website. Thank you again. This is BT for Truth and Shadow Podcast. You are the light in the darkness.
These are the voyages of the starship Enterprise. Its 5-year mission: to explore strange new worlds, to seek out new life and new civilizations, to boldly go where no man has gone before,